Hello, I'm Esther Githu-Ewart. It's Wednesday, December 1st. This is Africa 54.
As World AIDS Day is observed around the globe, South Africa renews its focus on prevention and treatment after several years' diversion fighting COVID, as Thuso Khumalo reports. Africa 54 also takes a look at South Africa's approach to women and girls in the sex trade and efforts to keep AIDS under check. Benin, Africa's top cotton exporter, has built an industrial park so the nation can create and sell finished goods, not just raw materials. Henry Wilkins has details. All this and much more on today's Africa 54.
Thursday is World AIDS Day, and every year on December 1st, the world commemorates the day. People worldwide unite to show support for people living with and affected by HIV and to remember those who lost their lives to AIDS. South Africa, a country with 7.8 million people infected, is extremely worried about the high number of young people still getting infected. As the focus returns to HIV/AIDS after 2 years of diversion to the COVID-19, the government, youths, and HIV advocacy organizations are now looking for solutions. Thuso Khumalo reports from Johannesburg.
This is Tulina Mokangwe, a young South African HIV activist. She was diagnosed with HIV in 2014 after a rape ordeal. This painful chapter has not deterred the 29-year-old. After going through rough experiences of isolation and stigmatization, she joined the Treatment Action Campaign TAC organization to fight for youth's access to HIV testing and treatment. She says the country's health facilities are the #1 culprit when it comes to factors that deter youth from accessing testing and treatment.
When you get in, you're like, are you HIV positive? They're asking you questions like, oh, young, why are you sleeping around and making noise about it?
Some blame alcohol and drug abuse on the rising number of youth infections. But other activists say ignorance and misinformation are also playing a big part.
People, they don't want to hear anything, want to tell them about HIV. As soon as they hear this word of HIV, they think it's a death penalty for you.
Myths are also still prevalent.
Where like people still think that there are some people who get HIV by just touching. That shows like this information of HIV hasn't really reached everyone.
But then, what is the solution as the youth accuses the government of failing them?
They should leave young people lead, because it's our situations, it's what we face every day.
South Africa's largest HIV movement, the Treatment Action Campaign, TAC, wants proper training for healthcare staff and availability of condoms in spaces dominated by young people.
What is important is to have youth-friendly clinics where young people will be accommodated, where young nurses and doctors will be there to cater for them because they'll be speaking one language, and also people living with HIV be in every facility so that they can advocate and educate and also be a peer educator to people, young people living with HIV.
The government says it is hoping that the National Youth HIV Prevention Strategy for South Africa, launched in June this year, will reduce the prevalence of HIV infection and sexually transmitted infections amongst the youth by 40% in 3 years' time. Thuso Khumalo for VOA News, Johannesburg.
South African authorities say young women and girls are now their most at-risk demographic, with many having resorted to transactional sex to pay the bills during COVID pandemic lockdowns. VOA spoke recently to a former sex worker and visited a clinic that treats adolescent girls and others with HIV. Kate Bartlett reports from Johannesburg on efforts to halt the spread.
This 31-year-old South African, who does not wish to use her name due to stigma, was a sex worker for more than a decade in Johannesburg's notorious Hillbrow neighborhood. In 2020, As she was struggling to make ends meet during COVID pandemic lockdowns, a client who refused to use a condom gave her HIV.
I'll get angry because men don't want to listen. Then we also get raped. When you get raped, and then when you realize that you are HIV positive, you can get angry more. Then sometimes it makes me feel sad.
A UNAIDS survey this year found since the start of the pandemic, 38% of South African women who sell or trade sex reported a large drop in income, and 5% more sex workers engaged in more frequent condomless sex. Anne Gatuku Shongwe is UNAIDS Regional Director for Eastern and Southern Africa. She says 63% of new infections in Africa are young women and teenage girls.
Adolescent girls between the ages of 15 to 24 are representing just about 30%. But women from 24 up to 49 are the remaining, 30%. So in general, this is a really, really high gendered epidemic for sure in our region.
COVID-induced poverty has worsened the situation as South African unemployment hit a record 35% in March. The UN survey showed 15% more South African women reported using sex work or transactional sex with so-called blessers to make a living. Community health worker Nonhlahla Mazaleni explains.
A blesser, it's older men who are dating young girls, and then they give them money in exchange for sex.
The former sex worker says she was pregnant when she found out she was HIV positive and promptly quit the work. While her baby was born negative, she's now taking daily antiretroviral ARV pills. South Africa next year plans to roll out new bi-monthly injectable ARVs to make prevention and treatment easier.
I think it will be a game changer. When I speak to the patients, they're looking forward to it.
The World Health Organization's Global Health Agency, UNITAD, says South African girls and young women will be the first given access to it. Kate Bartlett for VOA News, Johannesburg.
For more HIV/AIDS coverage, let's go over to Africa 54 health correspondent Lino Mudu. Hello, Lino.
Hello, Esther. Experts say girls remain disproportionately affected by HIV. For more insight, I am joined by Matsepo D. Mpafi, a senior youth ambassador with the Elizabeth Glaser Pediatric AIDS Foundation. Dee, welcome to the show.
Thank you.
So you found out that you were HIV positive at the age of 18. What has been the experience like from your diagnosis to now living a healthy life as a HIV positive patient, and now you're raising your voice against it?
Yeah, it was really shocking and horrible, really, because I was not expecting it. And if you could ask me even today on how I contracted HIV, I wouldn't really tell you. But what shocked me the most was the experience I got at the health facility when I was staged by the doctor, who was really rude in terms of telling me that I should not come next to her desk, and this is what happens when girls at my age have unprotected sex. So I was like, I thought I'll get more support in this facility, because this is where we get all the information, and this is where we get all the things that we think we could need in terms of any questions that we have regarding our health. But from there, I was removed from the adult clinic to the adolescent corner, which was funded by the Elizabeth Glaser Pediatric AIDS Foundation, where young people living with HIV sit there and have a support group. We talk about every challenges that we have, and then go through everything before we go for medication refills.
So it's really disturbing to hear such comment when you go to see a health expert to get the care you need, and they make such comment. One of the things, though, that experts are saying, they are sounding the alarm on the vulnerability of young women in Africa with regarding to HIV/AIDS. What are your thoughts in terms of why young women are so vulnerable to the disease?
Because young women are receivers, and in Africa, most of the time, we have young women being married by older men, much older men, which only detect what they should do and what they should take. So you find that they just give them the HIV. They don't want them to take PrEP. They don't even want them to take their medication after giving them HIV. So it's really bad. We need to support them in every way we could, because now they transfer the HIV to their babies at the young age.
So as a youth ambassador with EGPAF, how do you encourage other young people, women in particular, to take charge of their health?
I encourage them to say their voice and stand up for themselves, because at the end of the day, it's your life. The men will tell you not to take your medication, but you still have to stand up anyway, because next time you'll leave your child, and then what happens? So I encourage them to stand up and say what they need to say, and voice out their thoughts, voice out their needs, because we cannot just fight there and say we are fighting without saying nothing. We need to be heard.
To what extent do prevention messages resonate to young people?
Well, we try by all means to talk about PrEP and how men should support their women in terms of taking PrEP as well.
PrEP, pre-exposure prophylaxis.
Yes, pre-exposure prophylaxis, because we realized that most of the time they are not with their partners and we don't know what they are doing, where they are. So we advise to take PrEP all the time and use protection all the time, condoms. Yeah.
And 2022, World AIDS Day, today, after all these years, what is your message?
My message is that we should break the inequalities. We should try by all means as men to support our wives and our partners, because it's important to have your partner's support. You're able to live freely and be free and take your medication properly. And please, in Africa, we have men beating up women when they take medication. Can you just support them? Can our chiefs stand up and do something about these men and help them out? Thank you.
Very important you mentioned the chief, because we know the strength and the power of community leaders. Thank you so much. Matsepo D. Mpafi, it was such a pleasure to have you here.
Thank you for
all the
having
best. Me. And that was Matsepo D. Mpafi. She's a senior youth ambassador with the Elizabeth Glaser Pediatric AIDS Foundation. Now, the new UNAIDS report titled Dangerous Inequalities reveals that inequalities are holding back progress towards the elimination of the HIV epidemic and still prevail for the most basic services like testing, treatment, and access to new technologies. Joining us live via Skype from Geneva, Switzerland, for more insight is Fode Simaga, Director of Global Practice, Science, Systems, and Services for All at UNAIDS. Fode Simaga, thank you so much for joining Africa 54.
Thank you for inviting us.
So UNAIDS reveals through its reports that there are some major inequalities. Talk to us about how these inequalities are driving the epidemic, especially when we look at a region like sub-Saharan Africa.
So thanks. When you look at the sub-Saharan African, you can see, as your previous show demonstrated, that, 3 under 5 new infections are with young adolescent girl and young women. So that shows the extreme vulnerability of adolescent and girl, young women in sub-Saharan African. But more broadly, the inequality is at different levels. So you have the gender inequality that we just explained, and mainly in sub-Saharan Africa. You have also the vulnerability liaised to the most vulnerable people that has been, marginalized because of criminalization, law, stigma, and discrimination. You also have the children inequality. Could you believe that, like, the children represented 4% of the total of people living HIV, they are representing 15% of the death, or only 50% of the children have access to treatment, are under treatment, compared to roughly 80% for the adults. So that is another inequality. And the final big inequality is the resource inequality, with the Ukraine crisis, the post-COVID, it seems to have less and less money to finish the business, if I may use that expression, to go over the HIV and HIV response and reach the world goals, which is to end AIDS by 2030. And it's doable, but we have to attack those inequalities. And that is what we are trying to do.
So there are so many different reasons that you mentioned. How do we attack those inequalities? I was speaking to a young woman, Dee, just a minute ago, and she talked about the fact that one of the health providers were talking to her very condescending. Stigmatization is a big problem, right? Also resources. Where do we start?
So stigmatization, as Dee mentioned, is a very big problem. stigmatization, discrimination, criminalizations, law. It's a big problem. We believe, and that is under our executive director, Winnie Binyamina, that we have to put focus on education of adolescent girls and young women. You know, there is several studies in Southern Africa that show that if you have secondary school girls at secondary schools, plus comprehensive sexual education program, plus program to mitigate domestic or gender-based violence, you reduce by more than 50% the vulnerability to HIV, you know? So that is the solution. It's not an easy solution, it's not a one-day solution, but the real solution is to put and allow girls to reach to school, you know? In that way, they will be autonomous. They will master their own body. They will be able to say no to toxic masculinity.
Okay.
This is what we have to do.
So much to talk about, but for the CIMAG, we have to leave it there. Thank you so much for joining us. And
thank you.
For the CIMAG is the UNAIDS Director of Global Practice, Science, Systems, and Services for All. Esther, back to you.
Thank you very much, Leno, for that informative HIV/AIDS discussion. Now to Benin, and Africa's biggest cotton exporter. The West African nation has built an industrial park to move the country away from raw exports to finished products. Environmental activists say local manufacturing is working to cut down on emissions from shipping that contribute to climate change. Henry Wilkins reports.
In Benin, a new industrial park is taking shape that aims to be a model for local manufacturing while also reducing global emissions. Although still under construction, Arise IIP's Glo-Djigbe Industrial Zone, GDIZ, is already processing cashew nuts and making clothes for Western markets. Making finished products is new to Benin, Africa's largest raw cotton exporter, and is providing jobs to locals like Marlene Kesik-Lunom.
I am especially happy in this environment. It was no ordinary thing, since we're used to tailoring as a cottage industry here. I was always interested in tailoring, so it was a goal of mine to get involved when the park opened.
Economists say industrial parks will shape Africa's future as it pivots from the export of raw materials and import of finished products to local production. If the continent can develop its own manufacturing, that means more money for African economies and lower prices for end consumers. GDIZ says processing raw materials at home is also good for the planet.
The raw cashew is processed here. And instead of that, going to Vietnam and then back to the European market and American market to be sold to the consumers, that alone is allowing us to reduce the carbon footprint. Then you take cotton, same thing.
The World Bank says international shipping accounts for 3% of global greenhouse gas emissions that are fueling climate change. Activists agree that cutting shipments of African raw materials for overseas processing would help reduce the damage. Faik Abbasov is with Transport and Environment, a campaign group shaping the European Union's green policy.
We tend to produce raw materials in one country, transport it to another to process them, and then ship them to a third country to sell the final products. If we can get to an economy where raw materials are processed closer to the extraction points, we can cut down quite a lot of unnecessary emissions.
While the overall impact of reduced shipping is a fraction of global emissions, supporters say African manufacturing still has a role to play in the fight against climate change. Henry Wilkins for VOA News, Djigbe, Benin.
Still to come, a preview of December's US-Africa's Leaders Summit. Stay with us. In other news, the Vatican says Pope Francis is planning to visit the Democratic Republic of Congo and South Sudan early next year, a trip previously postponed due to problems with his knee. The trial of 18 people accused of responsibility for the deadly 2016 attack on a beach resort in Grand Bassam, Ivory Coast, has opened in Abidjan. South African President Cyril Ramaphosa delayed an appearance in Parliament on Thursday to answer lawmakers' questions and requesting time to consider a panel report that found initial evidence he may have violated his oath of office. Turning now to the World Cup, where Tunisia's Carthage Eagles on Wednesday became the first African nation to exit the 2022 FIFA World Cup in Qatar after securing third place in Group D of the global football tournament. VOA's Sandy Shomari is standing by in Doha with the very latest news and notes. Hello, Sandy, take it over.
Hello, Esther. We are right now waiting to hear this last few seconds of these two games, Esther. Right now, Belgium is playing Croatia, and also Morocco is facing Canada. Right now, Esther, Morocco or Moroccan fans are just waiting for these minutes to go so fast. They want this game to be over because Morocco is leading 2-1. And if this stands, Morocco will be going to the second round after so many years. The last time around they did this was 1986. So this will be a great party right here tonight if Morocco does qualify to the second round. On the other hand, Belgium has to win, but it looks like they're not. It's a draw right now with Croatia 0-0. If it ends that way, Belgium will be out. I spoke to the fans. They're not very happy about their team. They say this team is in the golden age. They're not the best that they have this time around.
And Sunday, which other teams are playing tonight and what should we expect?
Later tonight, Esther, the last two games we expect will be the Japan, the Blue Samurai against Spain, and also we have Germany against Costa Rica. Now, Japan might do something here, but Spain is a very good team, so we expect a very good game since we saw Japan doing what they did this time around to Germany. And Germany, Esther, have no choice but to win their last game. And this last game, Esther, history will be made because it will be all women referees led by Stephanie Frappart from France. I hope you're happy to hear that because it's the first time in a man's game that women are leading as referees.
Great to know, Sunday. Thank you so much. Sunday Shomari reporting live for us from Doha, Qatar. Now, a joint U.S.-Africa Leaders Summit is set to be held here in Washington from December 13th through December 15th, with U.S. President Joe Biden hosting the African leaders. They are expected to discuss trade, investment, and security on the continent. For more on what to expect, I'm joined by Dana Banks, Special Assistant to the President and Senior Advisor for the U.S.-Africa Leaders Summit. Dana, welcome to Africa 54.
Thank you so much, Esther. Pleased to be here.
Well, I suppose not all 54 countries of the continent are invited to this forum. Which ones of the African continent, which leaders will be coming to the summit?
Well, President Biden is really excited about hosting the 50 delegations that he has invited from the continent for the U.S.-Africa Leaders Summit. So we really wanted the rubric for the invitation process to reflect our partnership with the continent, with the African Union. And so we followed in line with the African Union's policies in terms of inviting countries who were currently in good standing with the African Union. So currently 4 countries are suspended from the African Union. They did not receive an invite, in addition to a country with whom we do not share full diplomatic relations and a country we don't recognize. But yet and still, we have, as of today, confirmation from 49 countries plus the Commissioner for the African Union for participation at either the head of state or head of delegation level to be coming to Washington in 2 weeks.
That's a great number, definitely. Tell us more about the summit and what you expect to achieve.
So really, this is the second U.S.-Africa Leaders Summit that's being hosted by U.S. President, and it's very exciting. But as what was held in 2014 till now, the world has changed a great deal. From the pandemic, climate change, there are so many challenges that we have globally that we need our African partners to work with us together on. As the pandemic surely showed, no country is safe if one country isn't safe. So this is really about meeting our African partners, having the president engage in conversations and the vice president and members of the cabinet to talk about how we address this era's most defining challenges and how we cooperate on health security, on climate change and adaptation, on food security that has been exacerbated by Russia's aggression in Ukraine. And unfortunately, many countries on the continent are feeling the brunt of that. But also lifting up opportunities, looking at strengthening our trade and investment relationship, attracting more of investment from American companies and American investors to the continent. And also an additional element of this summit is a focus on the diaspora. You know, the United States plays host to the largest diaspora population from countries across the continent, and really harnessing that strength to make for stronger policies and partnerships is going to be a key element of the summit.
You know, one of the questions I hear most of the times when this kind of partnership is, what kinds of goods is the United States looking for from Africa?
Goods. We're looking for engagement. We're looking for to strengthen our engagement, again, to reflect and meet the challenges that we have today and prepare for the future. And so whether that's partnering on strengthening digital technology, strengthening agribusiness, inviting more U.S. companies to invest on the continent, and also, again, recognizing what the continent has put in place in terms of trade and investment from the African Continental Free Trade Agreement, you know, strengthening our relationship there. So it's really about, you know, government can't do it alone. It's about harnessing the power of our private sector and entrepreneurs on the continent to facilitate that, to really realize the robust nature that is there in what is really the world's 5th largest trading bloc and a really consequential region for all of us globally.
So one of the things that Africa is definitely very grateful for, from hearing from the leaders that I've spoken to on the show and in other forums, is how grateful they are for President Biden's offer to help with the COVID-19 vaccination. And they're wondering what else they can get from the United States since they've been hit hard by the COVID-19 pandemic.
Well, this is a great question, especially because today is World AIDS Day. And as you recall, we celebrate, commemorate really, the president's emergency plan for AIDS relief that was put in place by President Bush 20 years ago. That partnership on health and the systems and the structures that were put in place, we were able to build off of those, unfortunately, to address the Ebola crisis that came thereafter, and then, of course, the current pandemic with COVID. So our vaccine sharing was only one element of that. Another element was to work with the Africa CDC to help to share and also share technology and information and manufacturing on the continent.
Dana, thank you so much. Dana Banks is Special Assistant to the President and Senior Advisor for the U.S. African Leaders Summit. And that's our show for today. Be sure to watch Africa 54 on our website at voaafrica.com.